Good morning.
You suck at managing your time.
You took my line. I was listening to a podcast that talked about that topic.
Yeah.
Because every time you go on YouTube, it seems like every conversation, every TED Talk, every inspirational video is about how to better manage your time. And the irony is that by taking your time to watch the video about managing your time, you're probably not using your time the best. So we're in the gym this morning and you're like, I want to talk about time, and then I shut you off and I said, no, we have to talk later, so keep the content in your head.
Yeah.
What is it that you wanted to share with me?
Well, I have a riff on that, but I have two other things. Time and timing. Time being time on the clock, and then timing being how you time action.
So like when you say time on the clock, you mean whatever time you allocate for the work in front of you?
Yeah, or like,
Not literally checking in and out.
no, time like, oh, I've been in real estate 4 or 5 years, as an example of what time on the clock looks like.
Okay.
Whether that's 1 year repeated 5 times or that's
Right.
actually 5 years of experience, that's a different story. But the idea of having the time on the clock. But to go back to your original point about time management, what I've learned is that, and this is through a philosophy that I study, is it's all about commitment management. And it's when we're in commitments, it's not I'm going to prioritize, I'm going to do this. It's I said I was going to commit to this and do this, and I am. So if I can't fulfill that, I need to make less commitments or make what we call full moves, which you can take care of multiple concerns or commitments inside of an action.
So what are some obstacles then, do you think, to fulfilling your commitments?
I think a lot of that comes down to who you are personally. So for me, I'm someone who can overcommit, and then I work to trim my commitments over time.
Why do you overcommit? Why does everyone overcommit?
Well, I think that as for me being ambitious in my endeavors, I want a lot of things as soon as possible.
So you're impatient.
I'm impatient.
Impatient. So you overcommit because you're impatient.
Yeah.
And all right, so that goes back to not being able to manage your time. So what was the other point about being on the clock versus how much time you have invested in something?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with a guy recently, yesterday, actually. And the conversation was about, he's an older guy, he's built over 400 homes, and I was just being a student, and actually he was kind of being a student with me. He was asking me how, I've done what I've done and what he could learn from my process. But we talked about my ambition, and I have a lifelong ambition to build, an empire, so to speak. And so I was pitching him on that, just sharing that this is what I'm up to and what I'm after long term, that kind of thing. And he was sharing that, well, he's like, I've got time on the clock and I've thought about a lot of these things that you want to do. And he said, a lot of people have that same or similar ambition, but very few are actually able to
Put it in play.
Put it in play, execute. Part of the challenge that he spoke about was because of their lack of knowledge or time on the clock, so to speak, they end up making mistakes and not seeing the signs that say, hey, this isn't a good idea, maybe we should pivot. They have these blinders on and say, well, no, this is my vision, so I'm going to will it into existence. And most of the time, they will themselves right out of their ambition.
So they're not very efficient in their time management, and so they end up misusing the time on the clock. Or they don't have enough time on the clock to realize even sometimes that they're misusing
sometimes they're just not in enough situations that give expertise or guidance around what's required, forbidden, and allowed, or that, hey, this situation you're in needs to change. Like, we need to think about other things because, like, for example, one of the common things in development and in real estate is capital. If you don't have the capital, I mean, what are you going to do? Your project's going to go back to the bank or whoever your lender is, or you have to sell. So you end up not fulfilling an ambition.
Right.
Yep. So time management, lack of experience, lack of time on the clock, going through the situations and being exposed to the threats that could happen in the marketplace, for example, if you haven't gone through that, you don't understand the responsibility required to deal with it. And if you get to that point, let's say I want to build a subdivision and I'm all gung-ho, I've got 50 lots, but I run out of money to develop it. Now my vision for the subdivision is no longer available.
That goes back to your comment about patience then.
Yeah.
All right. So the less time you have behind you in life, the harder it is to know what to do with the time you have in front of you.
Yes. And to that point, in the development of an ambition, let's just use a subdivision as an example. What if the town doesn't need a subdivision? That's the other timing piece that you have to pay attention to.
So the really successful developers are the ones that know how to gather the information, either from established databases or wisdom from people who've been through it, or the humility to just go out and, pound the pavement and find out for themselves what the needs are.
Yeah.
So in managing time, there is an element of, we've talked about this before, being curious, exploratory, humble, being willing to reach out, make yourself receptive to feedback. And in the process of doing all that, you actually are doing yourself a great service because you're better able to manage the limited amount of time that you have and curb your impatience. It slows you down organically.
Mm-hmm. I think about it too, like, so this gentleman who I was chatting with yesterday, he was grounding me and saying, hey, I love your ambition. Make sure you keep up with reality too, because reality is an immovable object. So if you think that you can just will this thing into existence, that might not be true.
Yeah, so that kind of begs the question, how does someone keep their fingers on the pulse of what's real? So in my work, I've established that ahead of time. What's real, what keeps me grounded, what's going to continue going on regardless if I pay attention to it or not, which is what reality is. Well, my family and, my spiritual development, my integrity, these are long-lasting, these are deeply rooted aspects of my identity. And if I notice any one of those, plus some others I'm sure, start to falter, then I think that my time management is poor. I'm ambitious, but if I'm not spending time with my kid, if I'm not, growing and thinking about how to give back, how am I going to do this thing, but also do it in a way that's sustainable for myself and for society and not cause more harm than good, then I'm getting away from proper time management. So time management just isn't about the actual manipulation of seconds and hours. Time management is about the management of your life, the whole picture. Mm-hmm. One event following the next is essentially how time is measured.
Yeah. Commitments.
Yeah, one commitment to the next. So you got to make sure that your commitments are solid.
Well, I think too, to even back it up, like to go back to what is the foundation, right? It's like we have biological mechanisms, like you aren't saying, gosh, I can't, like I'm hungry, like I need to go eat now. Your body is telling you that without you ever having to think about it. Your body is going to alert you. So we have those things to take care of, like fundamentally human first and then families,
Yeah.
And like you just kind of branch out with commitments. So an example of a full move, to go back to what I was talking about earlier, is like, I know I'm going to be hungry. I can anticipate that every day, typically 3 times a day. I also know my family's going to be hungry. What if I had dinner with them? I had everybody around. We all ate dinner. That would take care of all of our biological concerns, but I could also learn more about, hey, how was your day today? What happened here? So, inside of that 1 hour, you're making a full move by taking care of a lot of commitments that you have. And so some would say like, oh, that's great time management. Well, it's just commitment management, and obligations are things that you have to deal with.
It's sowing the seeds at the right time.
Yeah.
That were going to come to fruition later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, people, especially like with attentional troubles and so forth, that have poor time management skills, they're not able to organize and plan. Maybe there's some, attentional circuits in their brain that aren't receiving dopamine on a regular interval. There's some neurodevelopmental and developmental disorders that can help explain all of that. But for those of us that are within a standard and a half deviation of the norm, time management does take on a bit of a different thing. It is about managing the commitments, about planting seeds at the right time so that they come to fruition later. It's about being efficient. You say, you're sitting down and you're spending time with the things that are valuable and meaningful, but you're doing it in a condensed way because you anticipated that that's what is going to need to happen anyway. So rather than scattering it out throughout your day and maybe not being organized in your approach, that's one thing that I do. I know that if I leave if I leave work at a certain time, and I've got between this and this to spend with my kids, and it's a condensed version. It's about the quality of time I spend with them, not just the quantity, but the quality of time.
Yeah.
And then towards the evening, I can then have a more condensed quality of time with my next commitment, instead of spreading it out throughout the day and getting distracted and what have you. So you and I are in different places in life. You don't have kids, you're not married. So what are your big values that help you determine how you're going to manage your time? You mentioned fitness.
Yeah. So my human concerns, I have to take care of my body. Also my sociability. I have to find something that I can root myself in spiritually. Like also to do something that may be considered play. And so what I try to work on if I'm making a full move with all of those things, well, taking care of my body, if I associate positive moods with that, could actually show up as a form of play, for example. Or if I'm working out with someone, then that could be a form of sociability for me.
Two birds, one stone.
Yes. And then also, well, if we're going to the park versus going to a gym versus an athletic club versus the country club, that changes the memberships that I'm part of, for example. So then it's like, who are you around additionally, right? Like I may see a couple people at the gym like, oh, hey, so that is also part of the move of going to the gym. So I'm managing the gym as a commitment, which is a full move for me.
Right.
Outside of that, learning. So I always want to make sure that I'm being a student. And so learning for me shows up in multiple ways. So I study a business philosophy, that's building a foundation. But I can also study that in a group setting. So I have a meeting once a week with some guys where I have a chance to practice the fundamentals with the philosophy and learn more. And then we talk about, well, how does that fundamental apply to your life today? And so outside of that, I have like income producing activities, so whatever commitments are required with that and running a business. So I focus there. And my last thing outside of that would be like a significant other relationship. So I'd say like those are 4 major commitments that I manage every day.
Huh. I identify with a lot of those, obviously in different variants. One thing I'm big on is that people are always looking to have a place and a purpose in the world, and that how we manage our relationships and our business relationships and our interpersonal relationships kind of always come back to that ultimate need, is having a place and purpose of why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And what's the why? What am I really getting from this? And one thing that's not really talked about often when it comes to time management is spiritual development. And for people that are watching, whatever, I'm not talking about necessarily adhering to one specific belief system or the other. I'm talking about more like recognizing that there's something bigger than you in the world, and that you're just, for lack of a better term, kind of contributing, that it's not about you, it's about a social context. But also to fulfill that role, you have to take individual responsibility, and you need a clear set of values, standards, morals. You need to develop your integrity. So through the process of all that, I think spiritual development is what comes out of that. And obviously, there are different religions that have different ideas on how to achieve that. But in business, I don't often see, or I'll be honest, even in clinical psychology, we don't often see a lot of discussion about spiritual development. We just don't. It's usually almost exclusively about the individual and what the individual is getting and how to more efficiently do it, rather than the bigger question of ultimately why. And people will forego their relationships and they'll be on their deathbed. I mean, that's the worst possible scenario in my mind, is being estranged from my kids and my wife. That terrifies me
Yeah.
later in life.
It's alarming, and it's also interesting to me that I noticed that most of the time spiritual development shows up in the religious context, but that doesn't necessarily, like you just explained, it doesn't necessarily have to be in that context. It's more so of understanding there's a higher power and there are larger things at play than just me and my concerns. And in a way, you're contributing to that while also taking care of everyone and yourself, first and foremost.
Yeah, and obviously I have my opinions on where that ultimately leads, my own personal faith. But at the core of spiritual development is having a strong bedrock that's rooted in a moral system, in a personal standards that you hold for yourself,
Yeah.
Healthy values that help move the species and society forward, and not going into something exclusively just for the profit. Even though I probably lean more right than left, I do understand kind of like the socialist mentality a little bit. I don't know that it ultimately leads to the utopia that they suggest it might, but I understand the drive. I understand the desire to make things better for those who are disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
And so wherever you're at on the political spectrum, I think you have to keep that in mind. And there is something toxic about, how capitalism is developed. I mean, I don't even consider it true capitalism. I consider it like crony capitalism, essentially.
Yeah.
It's not even capitalism at its purest. But there are a lot of people being left behind. How we can tie this back into time management. I guess what I said earlier, this is, I guess, how it ties back into is there are two different ways to look at time management. There's managing the minutes and the hours, and then there's managing your whole life.
Yeah.
Which is simply made up, to your point, of a series of instances, one following the next, and that if you're not careful and you don't seek the right kind of guidance, you're going to end up making age-old mistakes, and you could save yourself a lot of time by what you call a full move, accomplishing two tasks in one, right?
Or multiple. Could be any concern or multiple concerns, but taking care of that in one action. It's like easy, simple would be like if you would have met with both of your kids at separate times and your wife at a separate time instead of meeting everyone at once.
Right. Assuming that satisfies everyone's need.
Yeah.
Because, one thing I do with my oldest is we try and go on a trip once a year together, just he and I. And then I'm starting that up with my youngest. And then, of course, Jennifer and I do things together. And then, of course, there's the communal activity, because you get different things from each one of those.
Agreed, yeah.
So managing my time for them and having a strong value set with them underscores everything else that I do. Yeah.
And I think, too, so this is my knowledge from the philosophy that I study is what drives your action is always your ambition. So your ambition to live a good life, take care of your family now and in retirement is fundamentally what I speculate would be what most people would want to do for, if they have a family, is they want to take care of them, right? Now, when we go through life and we're in commitments, it's like if I fail to fulfill this commitment, that means that I'm letting my family down because this commitment is getting me closer to taking care of my family now and in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So if I don't do that, now that's where I have to take responsibility and address where I can learn or be better for next time. And life is all, I believe, a series of interim situations. And all the situation is what is the threat that we need to avoid, the obligations we have to fulfill, and the opportunities that we can create.
Say those again, because
So first and foremost, have an ambition at top, and then life is a series of interim situations that we go through. And then each situation is always a threat to avoid, obligation to fulfill, and opportunities to create.
Okay.
And so when you think about things, so let's say it's like, let's say being late for dinner with your family. Well, the threat there is now you've produced a bad mood in your family, potentially wife upset, may have some cascading consequences. The obligation is just to show up and be present, And then the opportunity is you may learn something about your kid when you're there that you did not think about. Like that wasn't something that you came into dinner going like, I'm gonna learn this today, you know?
Right.
So that's and then life is just a series of those. Yeah.
One after the next.
To fulfill the ambition.
Man, that's really helpful stuff, man. I'm going to have to start thinking about it like that. Well, I appreciate all that feedback. That's good.
Yeah. That's been, and it's a change in thinking.
Yeah.
Because I've always thought about the time management. Well, let me manage these hours.
Right.
From here to here, I'm going to do this, without keeping my ambition in my mind as I take part in it.
Which a true ambition is.
Yes.
Yeah. In my own words, kind of alluding to the spiritual development of a person and creating those values and standards and morals that guide you. And I guess we can close on this piece. The reason I believe those are really important is because when the cloud of life settles over you and you're not doing as well by the numbers, and maybe you're not getting the promotions you want, you're not closing the deals you desire, if you're still guided by a set of standards and morals and values that you're not going to deviate from, then that will be like a lighthouse that guides you through those dark times. And when you come out on the other side of it, you'll still have your integrity intact. People will often, when they begin to get nervous or impatient, to circle back, they will begin to sacrifice those things. And they may win temporarily, but that is a short-lived win because they've sacrificed a huge part of their soul. They think that they have managed their time well by being victorious in the moment, but they have lost the war. And that's when things begin to crumble. Because whatever adverse move, whatever sacrifice of their character that they had to endure to get through that black time will eat away at the foundation of who they are. And later in life, they'll be in their 50s, 60s, and they won't have any of that around them. They may have won the individual battles, but the war will have been lost.
Yep.
So time management is your entire life.
Bringing it back to today. But if you live with that ambition in mind, you're more than likely to not experience that.
Yes. So clarifying the ambition when you go into something, the why.
And then sticking to the morals and values to keep you in alignment with that.
Yeah, through the dark times.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it's good.